Cheon Yeowun exhaled quietly, the sound of his teammates' cheers confirming what he already knew. He had passed the second test. Around him, relief turned to elation as the 8th group celebrated their victory, but the outcome carried more than joy. The moment marked the end of Yeowun's obscurity. His restrained strength, once overlooked, was now exposed to every watchful eye. Across the arena, heirs from powerful clans regarded him with a new silent awareness. As the next groups prepared for their turn, Ilming's expression hardened, his teeth clenched, the bitterness in his chest twisting tighter with each breath. The bruises on his ribs still pulsed with the memory of what Yeowun had done. He recalled returning to find his group crippled, their pride shattered, and the realization that the one he had dismissed as unskilled had orchestrated it all. On the opposite side, the 7th group's faces brightened as they saw their next opponents limping toward the stage. Confidence spread quickly among them. Whispers rippled through the students, noting how someone had struck every member of the 6th group. To some, it was a reckless act. To others, a calculated warning. The 7th group surged forward in a unified charge, their formation spreading wide like a tightening net. The signal rang through their ranks, a sharp call to execute the fishnet formation. Across from them, the 6th group remained still. Ha Ilming's gaze swept over his hesitant teammates, his expression sharp with restrained anger. A cold smirk followed as he muttered words only his group could hear, a promise that they would owe him for what came next. He raised his sword, the metal glinting under the light, and signaled a sudden shift. The 6th group began to move sluggishly into a new alignment, the arrow formation. From the opposite side, Woojin, the leader of the 7th group, watched with amused contempt. Their intent was obvious and to him, foolishly predictable. Ilming dropped his shield, his grip tightening around the sword with both hands. Then Ilming's arms expanded with raw internal force, his body anchoring low before he swung upward in a powerful arc. Woojin reacted instinctively, lowering his shield, but the impact shattered it like brittle wood. The sound cracked through the arena. His eyes widened in disbelief just as Ilming's sword drove through his chest, the force lifting him off balance. A wet gasp escaped Woojin's lips as blood filled his throat. Ilming pressed forward, channeling his energy downward. His command came out as a deep, controlled roar, and his team responded instantly, shields locking together as they advanced. Using Woojin's body as a barrier, Ilming pushed through the collapsing formation ahead. The 7th group faltered, their earlier confidence dissolving into panic as they stumbled backward. The watching students stared in stunned silence. The result was nothing like what any of them had expected. Even Hameng, observing from above, found his expression shifting, not in surprise, but in reluctant admiration. A faint curve touched his lips as he leaned back, murmuring to himself that this year's academy would indeed be an interesting one. Rising from his seat, he called out the official results. The 6th group erupted in celebration, their victory sealing their place in the next stage. Amid the noise, Ilming's gaze lingered on Woojin's fallen form before shifting toward Yeowun. His eyes held a silent challenge. Yeowun met that look with calm awareness, realizing that his earlier success had now earned him a troublesome enemy. When the dust settled, the cadets were dismissed. Many had expected to be briefed about the next trial, yet instead Hameng announced a short respite. A rare moment of rest before the 3rd test. The decision left whispers among the students, though none dared question it openly. Inside the main building, the mood was more solemn. A long table dominated the 1st floor office, stacked high with documents and scrolls. Instructors moved quietly, sorting through the results of the recent tests. Jin Chang approached the left guardian, placing a neatly arranged pile before him. Reports detailing the failed cadets up to the 5th group. Hameng scanned the pages, then remarked that the number of failures was unusually high this time. Jin Chang, standing beside him, asked if he referred to those from the prestigious sect families. Hameng's gaze lingered on a particular report before he set it down. His tone carried measured weight as he noted that these were not ordinary students. They were heirs of long-standing warrior families. Their pride would not take failure lightly. In another time, under the academy's old traditions, such rules would not have been necessary. Many of these students might have advanced through individual merit alone. Jin Chang replied with quiet resignation that there was little choice. If their positions and duties weren't reevaluated in accordance with their performance, the academy would face relentless pressure from the higher sects. Hameng remarked that the heirs of high-ranking sects would naturally grow stronger through the teachings of their own clans. It was the others, those born into lesser lineages, that weighed on his mind. Their defeat meant losing the chance to obtain the demonic dragon marbles and the opportunity to enter the manual library. With a faint stretch of his shoulders, he muttered that the cadets who had passed were likely already crowding the library halls by now. His assumption proved true. Outside, the grand entrance to the manual library was filled with hundreds of eager students present pressing forward to enter. Among the sea of cadets stood Yeowun, his gaze quietly tracing the intricate carvings that lined the pillars. While the others rushed toward the second floor, Yeowun stood still for a moment, his thoughts pulling him back to his last conversation with Submeng. He remembered how he advised him to ignore distractions until the second examination was over. Every ounce of effort, he had said, should go into mastering the dancing springs and dancing butterfly techniques, the foundation that would secure his advancement. At the time, Yeowun had questioned the instruction, wondering if skipping the library would place him at a disadvantage. Submeng had dismissed the concern easily, reminding him that the techniques he was being taught were far beyond the reach of the first or even second floor, secrets guarded within the higher levels of the library. Now, standing before the massive structure, Yeowun's lips curved faintly in a restrained smile. Submeng's lessons had indeed given him an advantage, but Yeowun was no longer content to follow direction blindly. With the quiet hum of Nano within him, he intended to absorb everything. As Yeowun stepped into the library, a vast stillness welcomed him. The sight alone carried a quiet majesty, more knowledge than he had ever seen gathered in one place. He moved deeper into the chamber, realizing he was alone on the first floor. The others had already advanced to higher levels. His allotted time was short, barely 2 hours, and his focus sharpened instantly. With measured composure, he began scanning through the manuals. Each page turned with deliberate speed. The faint hum of Nano resonated within his consciousness as it acknowledged his command. Yeowun flipped through the books swiftly, the motion almost mechanical in its rhythm. Within moments, each manual was stored and processed, the invisible voice confirming each successful scan. One by one, he devoured the shelves, knowledge captured faster than any human eye could hope to match. Minutes passed and the pace grew faster. Over 50 volumes were already cataloged, yet his intent did not waver. His movements carried quiet urgency as he approached the center of the library, and then paused. At the heart of the floor stood a towering monument of sapphire stone, its surface pulsing faintly with blue light. Seated beside it was a middle-aged man with a long, composed expression, revealing the subtle poise of a skilled warrior. Yeowun's gaze lingered on him briefly, assessing. The man's presence was not casual. He was a protector of this place, someone entrusted with purpose. Yet what drew Yeowun's attention most was the stone itself. The monument bore intricate inscriptions, glinting faintly under the light as if alive. As he passed, the man's steady eyes lifted toward Yeowun's tag, his tone calm but firm, as he explained that the monument had been left by the founder of their cult, the demonic lord himself. The words made Yeowun pause. The guard rose from his seat, continuing with quiet reverence as he mentioned that the inscriptions had been carved directly into the sapphire by the demonic lord's own hand. Yeowun stepped closer, his expression tightening with restrained awe. Upon closer look, the markings resembled flowing verses, not just writings but poetry etched with impossible precision. A subtle realization struck him. The cuts were too fine to have been made by a tool. The thought lingered. The demonic lord had inscribed these lines not with a blade, but with his own fingers. The guard's tone carried a quiet reverence as he observed Yeowun's gaze fixed upon the sapphire monument. He spoke of the demonic lord's feat, how even the strongest blade or concentrated internal energy could scarcely mark sapphire, yet their founder had engraved every stroke through sheer control of power channeled into his own fingertips. The man's expression softened as he added that most students hurried past, too absorbed in martial manuals to notice what stood before them. But Yeowun, he noted, seemed different. One who could recognize greatness, perhaps because greatness itself flowed in his blood. Yeowun inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the truth in the man's words. Had he not paused, he might have overlooked the monument entirely. The guard nodded, his voice turning almost wistful as he remarked that even though the inscriptions were left by Yeowun's ancestor, none among the demonic bloodline had ever cared to stop and read them. 2 decades of guarding this place, he said, had shown him how little reverence remained for the legacy carved in stone. Then, with a polite gesture, he stepped aside, urging Yeowun to continue his study. Yeowun offered a brief nod of gratitude and walked past him, but as he circled the monument, something unusual caught his eye. Faint grooves running down the opposite face of the sapphire. He stopped. The markings were long and narrow. He examined them closely, tracing the edges with quiet precision. The lines looked deliberate, not natural wear, but the remnants of an attempt to conceal or erase something. He summoned Nano's attention inwardly, instructing it to analyze the markings. A brief pulse resonated in his vision as the scan completed. The result was immediate. Nano confirmed that the grooves were indeed sword marks, carved with intentional force. Yeowun's composure faltered for a moment. The idea of anyone daring to scar a monument left by the founding lord bordered on sacrilege. Then Nano's tone shifted, adding another layer of observation. The markings, it concluded, were not made by a single weapon, but by 2. The depth and pattern distinct enough to confirm separate sources. Yeowun's gaze sharpened as he studied the faint grooves. The subtle difference in depth and direction could never have been seen by the naked eye. Yeowun commanded Nano to project the marks through augmented reality. A faint shimmer enveloped the monument as Nano activated the vision overlay. The stone's surface transformed before his eyes, the once faint scratches now hovering in three-dimensional relief. Yeowun examined them closely, observing the intricate variance in the strokes. The first set carried precision, clean and deliberate, each line drawn with control and mastery. The second set, however, was uneven, slanted, and chaotic, as though someone had attempted to obscure the original engravings. He studied the conflicting patterns in silence, a restrained tension building behind his calm expression. The disorder of the second set seemed intentional, as if meant to bury something deeper beneath. His thoughts moved with clarity as he instructed Nano to separate and remove the marks belonging to the second blade. The augmented projection shifted, peeling away the distorted lines until only the original etchings remained. In that moment, Yeowun's composure faltered. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in sudden recognition of purpose. The remaining patterns were no longer random slashes. They formed rhythm and flow, the deliberate path of a martial sequence. The remaining patterns were no longer random slashes. It was a codified sword-fighting form. Yeowun's silence deepened, broken only by the faint hum of Nano awaiting instruction. He admitted inwardly that his current martial knowledge was still insufficient to decipher which form it represented. Yet the design's refinement left no doubt of its significance. Composing himself, he commanded Nano to recreate the full movement encoded within the sword marks. Nano acknowledged, but before proceeding, explained that it first needed to determine the sapphire's hardness. The term itself puzzled Yeowun momentarily. How could he measure the density of something carved by the demonic lord himself? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. The guard returned, his voice carrying mild curiosity, as he remarked that Yeowun seemed more interested in the monument than in the manuals he had come to read. He guessed immediately that Yeowun had discovered the rear side of the stone, the scarred surface few bothered to notice. With a faint sigh, the man called it unfortunate, explaining that there had once been rumors about this very side holding the wisdom of a sword technique left behind by their demonic lord. Yeowun's attention sharpened. The notion alone stirred quiet intrigue within him, but the guard, shaking his head, continued in a regretful tone. No one knew who had defaced the monument, he said, but it was possible that whoever did so sought to conceal the technique for themselves. The thought lingered, heavy with implication. If the rumors were true, these weren't mere marks of vandalism. They were traces of something deliberately hidden. As the guard excused himself for a patrol, Yeowun's gaze followed him only long enough to ensure he was gone before returning to the monument. Nano's voice resurfaced softly in his consciousness, instructing him to place his entire palm on the stone to begin analysis. Yeowun steadied his breath and pressed his hand against the sapphire's cool surface. A faint tingling coursed through his skin, spreading across his palm. Nano's voice resonated calmly within Yeowun's mind, reporting that the hardness analysis was complete. On a scale where diamond measured 10, the sapphire stone held a hardness level of 7. Formidable, even for reinforced material. If the sapphire was this durable, then the one who left those secondary marks must have possessed tremendous strength, enough to scar what should have been nearly unbreakable. Before he could dwell further, Nano's tone shifted. It announced that, based on the hardness and the structure of the sword marks, it had successfully reconstructed the movements that created them. A faint shimmer formed before Yeowun, a translucent human silhouette taking shape in the air. The figure raised an illusory blade, its motion smooth yet impossibly fast. Yeowun watched intently as the projection flowed through a sequence of sword movements. The strikes were relentless, seamless, each motion connecting with precision into the next. Sparks of blue light traced every arc of the blade, recreating the rhythm of destruction once engraved into the monument. The speed was staggering. To the untrained eye, it would seem like chaos, but to Yeowun, it carried structure. Order hidden beneath overwhelming force. His composure faltered briefly as realization settled in. This wasn't a collection of scattered strikes. Every mark aligned perfectly into a single, continuous form. Nano confirmed it. All the movements belonged to one codified sword technique. Yeowun's pulse steadied, but his gaze deepened with awe. The form's complexity surpassed anything he had encountered. Even the intricate butterfly dancing technique, which contained 8 refined sequences, paled in comparison. That art had taken his mentor months to master, yet this transcended the known boundaries of skill, the flow, the ferocity, the precision. It was otherworldly. He allowed himself a faint exhale, his earlier expectations of the first floor now entirely shattered. What he had uncovered was no ordinary relic, it was a hidden masterpiece buried in plain sight. Composing himself once more, Yeowun instructed Nano to preserve the reconstructed form in its entirety. Nano acknowledged without pause. Yeowun realized that because of the defacing marks, he had nearly overlooked something extraordinary. His thoughts calm, yet laced with quiet disdain. Whoever had done this had acted with intent, to conceal, to corrupt, or perhaps to hoard the wisdom of the demonic lord for themselves. Yet irony crept into his mind. Through their sabotage, they had unwittingly left him the chance to uncover it alone. Before the thought could linger, Nano's tone returned. It revealed that upon further analysis of the erased markings, those left by the second blade, there were traces not of one, but 45 sword forms, each connected to the other in sequence. Yeowun froze, his breath stilled for a brief moment. 45 forms. The realization sent a current through his composure. At his command, Nano reconstructed them in order. A translucent figure materialized once more, blade in hand, beginning the first form. The next sequence followed immediately. Smoother, the transitions cleaner. One form bled into the next, each more refined than the last. By the 10th, Yeowun's expression had already shifted. By the 20th, his composure wavered with awe. The swordsmanship grew increasingly fluid. Sweat gathered at his temple as he followed each form with unwavering attention. By the 40th, the technique reached a level of near perfection. And by the 45th, the projection exuded something beyond form. When it ended, Yeowun's breath came steady but heavy, his skin damp with perspiration. Then, with renewed clarity, Yeowun gave his next command. He wanted to see them not as fragments of evolution, but as rivals. The first, raw form against the last. Nano confirmed immediately, initiating a battle simulation. Two avatars faced one another before Yeowun, reflections of mastery across time. Then, movement erupted. Both figures struck simultaneously, their motions swift and precise, yet vastly different in rhythm and intent. The clash ended almost as soon as it began. Yeowun's eyes followed the motion, disbelief flickering across his face as one avatar's blade sliced cleanly through the other's neck. The battle had lasted less than a breath. The 45th form, the culmination of all refinement, had effortlessly dismantled the very first. Composing himself, Yeowun instructed Nano to store every detail. All 45 forms, each sequence preserved for later integration. Turning from the Sapphire Monument, Yeowun approached the guard once more, his tone composed yet inquisitive as he asked whether the headstone existed only on the first floor. The man, slightly surprised by the question, replied that he wasn't certain. He had never been beyond the first floor, but from what he'd heard, each level of the library supposedly housed one of these monuments. Yeowun offered a polite nod, concealing the faint smile that formed beneath his calm expression. His thoughts stirred with quiet anticipation. More stones meant more secrets, and perhaps more buried techniques. With measured steps, Yeowun ascended to the second floor. The space above was smaller and quieter, yet filled with a steady murmur of activity. Rows of cadets sat reading in deep concentration, their eyes fixed on manuals they hoped would elevate their standing. He observed them briefly, noting the discipline in their focus. The allotted time here was longer, 3 hours instead of 2, and every student seemed intent on using it fully. Then, amid the rows of cadets, his gaze caught an all too familiar figure. Cheon Yeowun of the Blade Clan stood among them. Immersed in study, Yeowun's expression remained controlled, but his thoughts turned cautious. Unlike the other young masters who dismissed lower-tier knowledge as beneath them, Yeowun had chosen to immerse himself in it. Yeowun moved quietly through the second floor. At the center of the chamber, his gaze caught the familiar gleam of sapphire. There it was, another monument, identical in form to the one below, standing tall and unwavering amidst the still air. Circling to the rear of the monument, Yeowun paused. His eyes widened slightly. The entire backside was etched with dense, overlapping sword marks. The sight drew a faint, restrained breath from him, confirmation of what he had suspected. Without hesitation, he summoned Nano, instructing it to analyze the stone's surface. Moments later, Nano's report came through, clear and precise. The analysis revealed 2 distinct sets of sword marks, one forming a codified sword technique of 24 connected forms, and another, carved later, embodying a far more complex structure of 56 forms. 56, an astonishing number, far surpassing the forms hidden on the first floor's monument. It was clear now that each level of the library preserved the evolution of the same sword art. He exhaled slowly, regaining composure. His mind itched to study them immediately, to see the movements unfold before his eyes, but the presence of too many students made it impossible. With quiet restraint, he ordered Nano to complete its analysis and store both techniques for later reconstruction. Without wasting another moment, Yeowun moved toward the surrounding shelves, pulling one manual after another. The faint rustle of pages filled the silence as Nano continued its quiet work, scanning every text within reach. Yeowun moved steadily between the towering rows of shelves. The faint rustle of paper echoed across the quiet chamber, drawing unwanted attention. Several cadets turned their heads in irritation. The constant sound of pages turning broke their fragile concentration, already strained by the presence of guards patrolling nearby. Frustration simmered among them as they stole glances toward Yeowun, unable to comprehend his seemingly careless scanning. To them, he appeared impatient, skimming through text without respect for the effort they themselves poured into every line. A few tried to steady their minds, reminding themselves to ignore him, yet the sound persisted, calm and relentless. By the time the candle beside Yeowun's desk had nearly burned down to its marked line, Nano's voice whispered through his mind that 156 books scanned. From across the room, Cheon Yeowun of the Blade Clan continued to watch him, eyes narrowed in quiet observation. Yeowun remained composed, acknowledging inwardly that his task was done. He had gathered more than enough. Yet his true purpose in scanning so many manuals was not simple accumulation of knowledge. His thoughts drifted back to Submeng's words, advice spoken with the weight of experience. arrogance. Submang had once told him that the dancing butterfly technique, though counted among the demonic cult's 10 greatest arts, meant nothing without mastery born from hardship. A martial art, no matter how refined, could not flourish through memorization alone. True strength, he had said, came from repetition, endurance, and the sharpened instincts earned through countless battles. That was the essence of perfection. Submang had fought endlessly, pushing his life to the brink in every duel, and it was through that crucible that his mastery had been forged. The academy, filled with warriors from every sect, was the same proving ground Yeowun would need to face. As the memory faded, Yeowun's expression turned resolute. He knew his next step clearly. He would use Nano's augmented reality to create combat scenarios, to experience those battles without the constraint of waiting for them. Yeowun noticed the candle flame nearing its marked line and closed the final manual. His time was up. He stepped out of the library and handed the candle back. The instructor checked the booklet, circled Yeowun's name, and dismissed him with a curt tone. As Yeowun turned to leave, the man added almost carelessly that someone had asked about when he would be finished. Yeowun paused for a moment. Someone had been waiting for him? He considered asking, but the instructor's expression made it clear he would not elaborate. He let it go and walked out. His thoughts shifted immediately. The personal training rooms were now open to those who had passed the second examination. That meant he could finally transfer the sword data he had obtained and begin refining it through Nano's augmented reality. He quickened his steps, intent on getting there, but just as he approached the entrance, a figure stepped in front of him. Ha Ilming. The young man's face was dark, his tone edged with hostility as he said he had searched the dorms and the grounds to find him. Now that he had, he addressed Yeowun by his academy number. Yeowun's eyes cooled. He asked without interest why Ilming was looking for him again. Ilming's expression twisted. He accused Yeowun of what he already knew, of making half his group limp before the test. Yeowun sighed inwardly. He could feel the hostility radiating off Ilming like heat. Yeowun's eyes met Ilming's with a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His voice carried quiet disdain as he remarked that perhaps Ilming had no one to blame but himself for leaving his group unguarded. Ilming's expression darkened, his tone sharp with contempt as he replied that Yeowun had quite the mouth for someone so new to the academy. Yeowun's composure didn't waver. Inwardly, his thoughts steadied. Ilming wasn't the type to lose control through words. Yeowun recognized that beneath the hostility, Ilming was a capable fighter. He straightened, his posture shifting as focus replaced indifference. The air between them thickened. They were seconds away from clashing when a voice cut through the tension. Neither of them turned. The call came again, firmer this time, but both remained locked in each other's gaze, until a figure stepped cleanly between them. The sudden interruption drew a scowl from Ilming, who demanded to know who had dared to intervene. Yeowun's eyes narrowed as he recognized the intruder, Cheon Yeowun, the prince from the Blade clan. Yeowun wore a disarming smile, his tone casual yet carrying quiet authority. He acknowledged both of them with a light chuckle, remarking that it was no surprise they were so intent. After all, both had led their groups to victory in the second examination. Then, turning his attention to Yeowun, he bowed politely and requested a moment of his time. The gesture drew visible surprise from those nearby, but none more so than Ilming himself. His eyes widened slightly in disbelief. A young lord of the minor priesthood bowing to an ordinary cadet, the sight was almost unthinkable. Yet Ilming didn't move aside. His pride flared, and his tone hardened as he told Yeowun that if he wanted the meeting, he would have to wait. He had been searching for Yeowun all day, and no one, not even a noble, would dismiss him so easily. Yeowun tilted his head, his expression almost amused, his tone light but laced with subtle mockery. He spoke as though uncertain what to do, whether to insist or withdraw, but his feigned confusion only deepened Ilming's irritation. The tension snapped. Ilming lunged forward, his fingers thrusting like a blade, energy surging through his arm with the precision of an internal technique. Yeowun's hand moved once. The strike met an invisible wall of pressure before it could reach him. In the next instant, Yeowun's fingers halted a hair's breadth from Ilming's neck, his counter-strike effortless. If it had been a real blade, Ilming's life would have ended then and there. With quiet composure, Yeowun spoke. He asked if Ilming would be kind enough to give them space now. Ilming stepped back slowly, his thoughts burning with frustration. He hadn't even seen the moment he was stopped. There had been no stance, no preparation, and yet Yeowun had halted his strike effortlessly. When Yeowun withdrew his hand, he spoke without arrogance, simply asking Ilming to wait aside for a moment. Ilming let out a quiet exhale, masking his defeat with indifference. He muttered something about returning to the dorms and turned away. Yeowun chuckled softly as he watched him leave, scratching the back of his head in mild amusement before walking toward Yeowun. Yeowun's gaze followed him closely, his thoughts stirred with unease. What did this man want? Was this a test or an attempt to measure him? The strength Yeowun had displayed was far beyond what most cadets could comprehend. Facing him directly now would be reckless. Without hesitation, hesitation, Yeowun activated Nano's augmented reality system. His vision shifted subtly as guiding lines appeared, marking Yuchun's stance, reach, and movement trajectory. Then Yuchun lifted both hands, palms open in a gesture of peace, amusement flickering in his tone as he told Yeowun to relax. He said there was no need for such tension, that after all this time, he had simply come to introduce himself. And then, with unshakable calm, he added that he was there to finally meet his half-brother. Yeowun's expression hardened at once. The word echoed sharply in his mind. The thought cut through him like a blade. It sounded like mockery, an insult cloaked in civility. Yuchun seemed unbothered by the tension radiating from him. Then, without hesitation, he acknowledged the truth both of them knew well, that the six great sects had treated Yeowun cruelly since his arrival. The subtle tone of pity only deepened Yeowun's anger. He stared at Yuchun with restrained hostility, realizing the man knew everything, yet still spoke with such ease. The notion that Yuchun expected to be welcomed as kin was almost laughable, but Yuchun's expression remained light. He explained that his intentions were not hostile, that he had only wished their first meeting to be friendly, as he added that he had grown fond of Yeowun, that perhaps they were alike, both walking the path of the saber. The reasoning struck Yeowun as hollow, yet Yuchun continued, recalling how he had watched Yeowun fight during the second examination. The moment he severed the arm of the girl from the musician sect. Rather than shock, it had inspired admiration. From that instant, he claimed Yeowun had earned his respect. Yeowun's patience finally snapped. His voice cut through the air, telling Yuchun to stop with the pleasantries and state what he truly wanted. Yuchun sighed softly, his demeanor never breaking. He admitted that trust would take time, and that perhaps he had approached too casually. But if Yeowun wanted clarity, he would have it. He told Yeowun he wanted him to join the Saber sect, the Blade clan itself. For a moment, silence fell between them. The offer struck Yeowun like a blow. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing in disbelief. Yuchun watched his reaction with faint amusement, and that he could hardly blame him for it. Yeowun's gaze sharpened. He demanded to know if Yuchun was truly serious. Yuchun nodded once, the faint trace of a smile still on his face. He explained that he had waited outside the manual library all this time for this very conversation. He made no attempt to disguise his sincerity. To him, Yeowun was not an enemy, not someone to challenge, but someone worth standing beside, and with quiet conviction, he finished his offer, that he wanted Yeowun to join the Saber sect and remain by his side. Yeowun's question came calm but edged, whether Yuchun's offer was simply a disguised command to surrender the path toward the minor priesthood. Yuchun let out a brief laugh, scratching the back of his head as if caught off guard. He admitted that perhaps it had come across that way, though in his view, the priesthood was already far beyond Yeowun's reach. The word struck sharply, demanding to know what Yuchun meant. Yuchun's smile lingered, yet there was quiet arrogance in the way he spoke next. He told Yeowun that if both of them continued mastering the saber, they would eventually find themselves as opponents, that such a confrontation was inevitable. And when that day came, the outcome was already decided. Yeowun, he said, had no chance of victory, yet his words weren't entirely cruel. He added that he admired Yeowun and respected his determination, and that was precisely why he wished for them to walk the same path, not as rivals, but as allies. If they stood together, he said, the future would bring only prosperity and glory. Yeowun's expression remained composed. Beneath that calm exterior, his thoughts hardened. So this was what Yuchun believed. His voice came cold, clear, and final. He refused. Yuchun froze, his casual demeanor breaking. The rejection, so sharp and absolute, left him momentarily speechless. Then Yeowun spoke again, his tone carrying a quiet, unwavering threat. He told Yuchun that he would make a counteroffer, not of alliance, but of warning. If Yuchun stayed out of his way, he would have nothing to fear. But if he interfered, even once, Yeowun promised he would not hesitate to end him. For the first time, Yuchun's expression twisted. The composure faded from his face, replaced by something darker. In Yeowun's sight, Nano's display came alive, numbers and readings flaring across his vision. A mechanical calm echoed in his mind that a powerful energy force is rapidly gathering within the target's right arm. Yuchun's right arm shifted slightly, the faintest tremor of energy rippling through the air. Yeowun responded instantly, a quiet, precise step to the left. For a heartbeat, tension coiled between them like drawn steel. Then Yuchun's expression changed. The sharpness in his eyes dissolved into laughter. Nano's calm voice resonated in Yeowun's mind, confirming what his instincts had already sensed. The surge of power had dissipated, and the enemy showed no intention of striking. Yuchun wiped a hand over his face. His voice carried a mix of amusement and mockery as he admitted that he had been angry for a brief moment. But Yeowun's bold words, "Don't you dare try to get in my way," or it had been so unexpectedly audacious that he couldn't help but laugh. He called it suave, almost impressive. Yeowun remained silent. Inwardly, he could see through the laughter, the mask of ease hiding an irritation Yuchun didn't care to show. Yuchun gave a light shake of his head. He remarked that perhaps the exchange had been meaningless after all, that since both walked the same path, their confrontation was inevitable. Then his voice trailed off, shifting ever so slightly. Nano's warning came again, sharp and immediate. A new surge of energy energy was forming in Yuchun's right arm. Before Yeowun could move, Yuchun's hand rose high. His expression steadied, and with a swift motion, he slashed downward. The air trembled with a sharp crack. The stone split cleanly where it struck, a faint glow tracing the path of destruction. Yeowun's eyes widened, the sight unmistakable. Blade Ki, energy so refined it had taken form, a manifestation of mastery. Around Yuchun's arm, the energy coiled like a living blade, radiating calm lethality. Yuchun looked at him, the earlier levity gone from his tone. He told Yeowun coldly that he still had far to go before daring to make threats of life and death. Yeowun studied Yuchun's composure. To release saber energy bare-handed, it meant the man had already reached the pinnacle of internal refinement. The rumors were true then. Among the Academy's prodigies, only Yuchun and the Shadow Sex Muyan stood at the top. As the glow faded, Yuchun turned away. He cast one last glance over his shoulder as though their encounter had been nothing more than a casual meeting. Yuchun departed, leaving silence in his wake. Yeowun remained where he stood, his fist tightening as the last echo of footsteps faded. He had defeated Mukum, seen Wunryu expelled, and stood firm against every challenge so far. Yet before Yuchun, the reminder of his own limits cut sharply. The thought lingered only a moment before he subdued it. His goal was not to catch up to them. His goal was to surpass them all, to rule above them, to make every one of them kneel beneath his strength. Far from him, Yuchun walked away through the corridors of the academy. He had restrained his anger behind laughter, but beneath that surface lay irritation and a trace of disbelief. The reason was simple. Yeowun had read his movement. The strike he had prepared would have taken Yeowun's arm, yet the boy had moved before the energy could form. In that realization, Yuchun's amusement faded. His earlier confidence was tempered by caution. Yeowun was not the naive fool others assumed him to be. Meanwhile, Yeowun entered one of the academy's training rooms. The wooden panel on the door flipped from vacant to occupied as he stepped inside. The space was narrow, illuminated by a few dim candles along the walls. It was not a place for grand maneuvers, but one of solitude and concentration. The walls were thick enough to hold both sound and power, more than enough for his purpose. He knocked lightly on the stone wall, assessing its firmness, and nodded once. The room would do. He initiated Nano's augmented reality system and prepared to relive what he had witnessed. The air in the room shifted subtly, the faint shimmer of light bending around him as Nano projected the reconstructed sequence from the sapphire stone. Yeowun stood motionless as the spectral figure before him moved with impossible speed. The illusion's blade sliced through the air in a pattern too complex for the eye to follow, every motion sharper and faster than anything he had seen before. His breath caught in his throat. The forms displayed a depth of mastery that dwarfed everything he had learned. Even the dancing butterfly technique, so elegant and deadly, would crumble before such precision. The very nature of the art seemed untouchable, as if no mortal could hope to stop it. Nano shifted its sequence, projecting a second figure beside the first. The newly formed avatar began replicating another sword style, its movements unrefined at first, hesitant, almost human. Yet with each repetition, the stance steadied, the timing refined. Every flaw vanished, little by little, until the 56th form unfolded before Yeowun's eyes like a flawless cascade of motion. A chill rippled through Yeowun's body. The progression itself was haunting. It was no longer simply a weapon's art, but the culmination of obsession, refinement, and madness. He could sense the mind behind it, a swordsman who had devoted everything, perhaps even his sanity, to perfection. Nano responded to his command and generated two avatars. One wielded the very first form, the other the later 56th. They faced each other in silence before engaging in combat. The outcome was instant. The earlier form fell before the second even completed its first strike. As the duels continued, each form facing its successor, the results grew more intricate. By the 36th iteration, the weaker form managed to block 15 of the 24 initial strikes, yet the dominance of refinement remained absolute. When the final sequence ended, the simulation fell still. The outcome mirrored what Yeowun had seen from the first sapphire stone. Each evolution of the technique surpassed the last by a single, devastating refinement. The flaw of one generation became the strength of the next. He watched in silence, then turned the thought inward. If these flawless forms could only be interrupted by something equally fluid, perhaps the dancing butterfly technique could serve as the counterweight. The augmented field shimmered again as Yeowun positioned himself opposite his own projection. The holographic opponent raised its blade and the clash began. Fluid illusions meeting solid resolve. The strain on his body was immediate. The augmented flow of motion heightened his awareness to an unnatural level. Inside his mind, Nano's analysis unfolded in real time. Neural activity accelerated sharply, and pathways of energy awakened across his frame. The system registered stimulation across key pressure points: saliva container, heaven projection, bird tail, middle epigastrium, spirit palace, and sea of chi. The rush of internal force gathered deep within his abdomen, spiraling like liquid fire through his core. Nano stopped sending alerts and began recording the changes in his body as data, recognizing that the transformation was not harmful to its master. After a long while, Yeowun regained awareness. He had been lost in countless battles against the perfect swordsman, but now confusion set settled in as his focus returned. He remembered the simulation clearly, yet it felt as though it had all been an illusion. His internal energy had grown vastly. What should have taken decades had surged within hours, an increase equal to 40 years worth of cultivation. Realization struck him. What he had experienced was not illusion but breakthrough. The awakening had not only deepened his energy, it had refined him entirely. He stood in silence, the truth sinking in. He had achieved awakening through the simulation itself, without Nano's aid. The technique he had studied truly was one of the greatest in all of Murim. His body now felt lighter, stronger, capable of executing the dancing butterfly technique with greater precision than ever before. He rose, took position, and performed the first formation of the butterfly blade dance. The sound of his hand slicing through air was sharper than before. A faint silver light trailed his movement, leaving behind a visible trace of energy. Yeowun's eyes widened slightly. He had materialized his own chai. It was not yet stable enough to take the shape of a saber, but he knew that with another demonic dragon marble and the 60 years of internal energy it would grant, he could bridge the gap and reach Yuchun's level. Nano reported that he had been completely immersed for 2 hours straight. Yeowun was startled to learn that he had been training for 2 hours. Realizing the time, he decided to return to the dorms and postpone the full data transfer. He instructed Nano to transfer only the first forms from the sapphire stones, along with the 45th and 56th forms, directly to his brain. Nano confirmed the command and began the transfer. A sharp sting passed through Yeowun's head, brief but clear. Moments later, the movements of the sword forms surfaced naturally within his mind, as if he had practiced them countless times before. He then asked how long it would take for his body to fully adapt to the new techniques. Nano responded that it would require approximately 10 hours to completely alter his muscle fibers and tendons. Yeowun sighed at the answer. The process was lengthy compared to the dancing butterfly technique, but he accepted it without complaint. He would simply wake early the next morning to continue. With that thought, he left the training room and made his way back to the dorms. When he arrived, he noticed the room was still half empty. Many cadets had not yet returned. He wondered if they were still training in the personal practice rooms. Hobum greeted him with a respectful bow, holding a book in his hand. Yeowun asked if he had found anything useful. Hobum smiled and replied that most of the manuals he had read were on Class 2 martial arts, and since he was not skilled in bare fist techniques, he had chosen to study a kicking form instead. Yeowun glanced around the quiet dorm, his thoughts steady. Nearly everyone was still pushing themselves, determined to improve. The academy had announced 3 days of rest, but to him, there was no such thing as rest. The next day at 4 p.m., Yeowun returned to the personal training room to complete what he had left unfinished. Once again, he entered the simulation and soon lost consciousness as Nano continued the procedure. Nano reported that the alteration of Yeowun's muscle fibers and tendons had been completed, and that the general anesthesia was being lifted. After 10 hours, Yeowun's eyes opened at the sound of Nano's voice. His breathing was rough, and his body trembled as nausea overtook him. He leaned forward and vomited onto the floor, the aftermath of the transformation far harsher than before. Nano immediately stabilized his body, regulating the internal recoil caused by the drastic physical changes. The tension in his muscles gradually eased. Yeowun exhaled heavily, regaining control of his breath. The recovery was painful, and he knew he would never get used to this stage of transformation. He rose slowly, flexing his fingers before clenching his fist. The strength that coursed through his body felt entirely different from when he had mastered the butterfly blade dance. Removing his top, he looked down at his chest and arms in quiet astonishment. His upper torso had transformed. Dense muscle traced every line of his frame, sculpted and firm as if forged through years of training. It hardly felt like his body anymore. Energy pulsed through every fiber, his movements lighter and more responsive. He felt capable of breaking through stone. Testing the thought, he steadied his breath, drew his arm back, and drove his fist toward the wall. On the other side of the wall, Har Ilming was deep in meditation, eyes closed in concentration. His mind was fixed on his training, determined to surpass the limits that had humiliated him. Once, he had believed himself capable of defeating any of the princes, and he had proven his strength by injuring Mukum. But his complete failure to match Yuchun had shattered his pride. Realization came bitterly. His arrogance had blinded him. He understood now that he needed to train harder, to push beyond resentment and aim higher. The anger he once held toward Cheon Yeowun no longer mattered. He told himself that chasing such a grudge was beneath him. He would rise by looking beyond it, by dreaming bigger. Then, without warning, a deafening explosion tore through the ceiling above. A violent tremor shook the ground, and rocks rained down into the room. Dust filled the air as Ilming's eyes snapped open in alarm. A massive stone struck his shoulder and drove him to the floor. He struggled to remain conscious, confusion and pain overwhelming him. Through the haze, a faint image appeared above the hole in the ceiling. Yeowun's face. Ilming's fading thoughts twisted in anger, assuming an ambush even as his strength gave out. out. His final bitter thought was of Yeowun before darkness overtook him. Moments later, the instructor responsible for the training halls arrived, keys rattling as he forced open the door. Seeing the destruction, he immediately carried Ilming to the medical ward. When he returned, fury burned in his eyes as he confronted Yeowun. The instructor's reprimand came sharp and loud. He reminded Yeowun that he was fortunate student 108 had survived. If Ilming had died, expulsion would have been immediate. The incident would be recorded in his final evaluations as a disciplinary mark. Yeowun stood silently and bowed his head. His only response was a quiet apology. The instructor continued, ordering that Yeowun be banned from using the first and second floor training rooms. He was permitted to use only the basement facilities, with a final warning: if he caused another incident, his access would be permanently revoked. Yeowun bowed again, acknowledging the order with measured calm. As Cheon Yeowun left the training room, the instructor stood frozen in thought. The image of the shattered wall lingered in his mind. That wall had been built from century stone, dense enough to withstand reinforced strikes. Yet Yeowun had destroyed it with a single barehanded blow. The realization unsettled him. If a cadet could break such a wall unaided, it meant his internal power had reached, or perhaps surpassed, its natural peak. On his way back to the dorms, Yeowun's thoughts circled around the same disbelief. He questioned how his strength had grown so drastically. Unable to comprehend the transformation, he had never imagined that one strike could tear through stone. Nano responded with calm precision, explaining that his strength came from the complete optimization of his muscle fibers and tendons. The procedure had pushed his body to its structural limits. The word startled him. He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly as Nano continued its analysis. His current state was the result of altering his body to a point where raw physical power alone could leave marks on material as hard as sapphire. Yeowun's thoughts turned reflective. The realization dawned that when he transferred the sword forms from the sapphire stones, he had only gained the data from the blade marks themselves. There had been no record of the ki flow or internal energy used to carve them. In past transfers, like the dagger technique and the dancing butterfly technique, he had acquired both the motion and the energy flow required to execute them perfectly. This time, however, the adaptation had focused solely on recreating the same physical power needed to mark sapphire. He wondered if that meant his body had already reached its full potential. Nano clarified that this was only a minor adjustment, an enhancement that did not hinder his natural development. His physical growth would continue, and as his body matured, the strength of his muscle fibers and tendons would evolve further. The next day, deep in the underground floor of the personal training rooms, Yeowun resumed his training. He stood at the center, steadying his breath as he prepared to test the codified fighting form once more. Though the data of countless hours of practice existed within his mind, this was the first time he would attempt the technique physically, the technique believed to be the demonic lord's ultimate art. He exhaled deeply and began. The blade sliced through the air in rapid succession, tracing the 24 movements of the form. Each cut was sharp and precise, yet when the sequence ended, no sense of fulfillment came. His brows furrowed. Something was wrong. He repeated the sequence again, pushing his concentration to its limit. The rhythm was perfect, the transitions clean, yet the feeling remained incomplete. It was as though something vital was missing, an unseen layer of intent that his body could not replicate. Determined to find the flaw, Yeowun switched to the counter formation, the 45th sequence he had studied from the sapphire stone on the first floor. As his sword moved, a spark of clarity ignited within him, every motion aligned effortlessly, each cut merging into the next. When the final stance settled, satisfaction crossed his face. The counter technique had flowed naturally. It was perfect. The realization struck him with both excitement and confusion. He could flawlessly execute the counter, yet the original ultimate sword technique still felt incomplete. It lacked the weight and essence of what he had seen in the simulation. To confirm his suspicion, he commanded Nano to recreate both sets of movements for comparison. The augmented reality projection activated immediately, forming two avatars before him, one translucent and undefined, the other a precise mirror of his own body. Both began to move in unison, their blades tracing through the air as the test began. As Cheon Yeowun studied the simulation closely, the distinction became unmistakable. The projected figure's sword flowed without interruption, each movement merging seamlessly into the next. His own, though technically correct, carried a stiffness that disrupted the rhythm. The transitions were connected, yet imperfect, fractionally delayed, lacking the smooth continuity of mastery. He exhaled sharply and slumped to the floor, frustration tightening his chest. The forms were right, his control was precise, but something fundamental was missing. His mind raced for the cause until a sudden realization struck him: the energy flow. The truth unfolded instantly. Without channeling his internal energy, his movements were hollow. Every advanced technique he had learned, including the dancing butterfly technique, had required proper ki circulation. Expecting perfection without it had been foolish. He straightened, his expression turning serious as he recalled the inscription on the first floor's sapphire stone. Perhaps what he sought wasn't in the sword marks, but in the words written upon its front. He ordered Nano to recreate the surface of the stone. Nano searched through his visual data and retrieved the recording, projecting it in front of him. The blue etched stone reappeared appeared, its ancient script glowing faintly. Yeowun studied the writing, reading the words carefully. A great wind came forth. The clouds rose on high. Now that my might rules all within the seas, I have returned to my old village. Where will I find brave men to guard the four corners of my land? He frowned, the poem appearing ordinary, an expression of victory and nostalgia. Yet something about it felt deliberate, as though it hid meaning behind simplicity. He questioned whether the demonic lord had altered the text as a cipher. Nano interrupted before the thought could continue. The system identified the writing as an ancient poem composed by Liu Bang, the first emperor of the Han dynasty, celebrating his triumph over Xiangyu. Yeowun's confusion deepened. If the poem wasn't written by the demonic lord himself, why had it been engraved there? He considered whether the words held a hidden message, but Nano's response came curtly, no. Accepting that, Yeowun refocused. He instructed Nano to analyze the entire image once more, searching for any concealed details that might reveal the key he was missing. Nano completed its analysis of the sapphire stone's surface and reported its findings. At the base of each inscribed character, it had detected a series of minute punctures, small holes carved deliberately into the stone. Cheon Yeowun leaned closer, eyes narrowing. He examined them carefully, running through possibilities in his mind. Pressure points. The thought surfaced quickly. Perhaps each hole represented a specific acupoint in the human body, but the logic didn't align perfectly. 4 holes, for instance, might suggest the birdtail pressure point, yet qi flow traditionally began from the sea of qi in the lower abdomen. If that were the case, there should have been 7, not 4. Then his gaze caught on the strokes of the carved characters. The number of strokes and the holes beneath each might be connected. His thoughts sharpened. The character he focused on had 3 strokes. If he added that to the 4 holes below it, it totaled 7, the starting point of qi flow. His pulse quickened. He turned to the next character, the one symbolizing wind. It held 9 strokes. Beneath it, another series of holes appeared, each count aligning perfectly when calculated in sequence. He moved through the entire inscription, combining stroke numbers and hole counts, tracing each as if following a hidden current. The realization struck with absolute clarity. Each mark represented a precise pathway, the flow of energy through the body, connecting 23 vital pressure points in total. The poem was not merely a verse, but a cipher, encoding the secret of qi circulation for the ultimate sword technique. A surge of exhilaration overtook him. The missing piece had finally revealed itself. He couldn't hold back his excitement. His voice echoed through the chamber, filled with astonishment and pride. He had solved it. He had found the key to the ultimate technique. It was already dinner time when Cheon Yeowun entered the hall, the familiar scent of food filling the air. The evening meal was different from usual. Today was a special occasion. The rich aroma of noodles reached him, and for a brief moment, the simple pleasure lifted his mood. After finishing his dinner, Yeowun walked back toward the training rooms with purpose in his steps. His mind was fixed on the breakthrough he had uncovered. With the flow of qi now understood, he was eager to test the ultimate technique properly for the first time. Just as he reached the corridor, a voice called out to him. A young cadet approached and bowed respectfully, introducing himself as Student 200, Yompa. He requested a sparring match if Yeowun had the time. Yeowun stopped and turned. A sparring match held no appeal. He had no reason to waste time fighting someone he had never met outside of formal examinations. Yompa hesitated, then smiled lightly, adjusting his tone. He offered a proposal. If Yeowun agreed to the match and managed to defeat him, he would share valuable information about the upcoming 3rd examination, along with a small gift. Yeowun regarded him in silence. The offer made little sense. Trading important information for a simple duel was reckless. He questioned Yompa's motive, unable to find logic in the gesture. The young man's response was composed. He explained that it was nothing more than a test, a chance to measure his own strength against Yeowun's. That Yompa took his stance. His breathing steadied and a quiet focus filled his movements. He admitted that his techniques might not be as fearsome as the ones Yeowun had displayed against Wunryu, yet he wished to demonstrate the power of his sect, the Surging Moon Sect. Yeowun's hand flicked once in a simple gesture of invitation. His voice carried no emotion as he signaled for Yompa to begin. Yompa launched forward immediately. His speed was not on par with Chun Mukum's, yet his movements carried power. Cheon Yeowun gauged Yompa's strength the moment their clash began. His opponent's power was comparable to that of a typical group leader, formidable by ordinary standards, yet far below what Yeowun had become. As Yompa closed in, Yeowun shifted his footing effortlessly, sidestepping the strike. Yompa adjusted quickly, spinning into his next formation with confidence. But before he could recover, Yeowun struck. His palm connected squarely with Yompa's chest, releasing a burst of sheer power. The impact sent Yompa hurtling backward, crashing into the ground with enough force to leave a shallow crater behind him. Blood spilled from his mouth as pain seared through his ribs. The duel had ended in a single move. Yompa stared up at the ceiling, his shock overtaking the pain. He couldn't comprehend the difference. The man before him was not the same Cheon Yeowun he had seen days earlier during the confrontation with Wunryu. The change was too vast. Yeowun stood motionless. Inwardly, a trace of unease stirred. The power behind that single strike had been far greater greater than intended. He questioned if he had gone too far, if his opponent had survived. Yonpa gasped, struggling for air, his mind reeling. The defeat was absolute, humiliating, and yet awe-inspiring. He had believed himself to possess the strength of a first-rate master, confident that he could exchange at least a dozen movements before losing. But Yeowun's power had rendered even that confidence meaningless. Forcing himself upright, Yonpa steadied his breathing and spoke through the pain. He admitted Yeowun's strength, acknowledging his holy bloodline. Despite the blow, he kept his word, preparing to share the promised information. Before he could continue, Yeowun's voice cut through cold and direct. He demanded to know the true reason behind the challenge. The offer of a duel had made little sense. There was nothing for Yonpa to gain, win or lose. Yonpa smiled faintly, wiping the blood from his lips. He remarked that Yeowun's distrust was well-founded. The match had been nothing more than a test, just as he had said earlier. Yonpa nodded, confirming it. That structure was essential to the formation's strength, yet even mastering the 7 demon sword technique alone was said to be difficult. Performing the full decimating formation demanded synchronization and understanding beyond ordinary martial skill. Unless one was already a first-rate master, grasping the formation's essence would be impossible. Yeowun quickly understood the implication. He asked if the sparring match had been a way to measure whether Yeowun possessed the ability required for the upcoming examination. Yonpa admitted it without hesitation. A single display of technique would not have been enough to make that judgment. He had needed to see Yeowun's true skill in motion before extending an invitation to join him for the 3rd examination. That statement drew Yeowun's focus. Yonpa was requesting him as an ally. Yonpa went on to explain the true nature of the coming test. The 3rd examination would require each student to handle everything independently, from learning the martial art to executing it flawlessly. However, group leaders would still be assigned based on evaluations from the 2nd examination. Yeowun's tone lowered as he asked if that meant the chosen group leaders would have the authority to select their members. Yonpa confirmed it. Those leaders would indeed choose their own teams. Of course, not everyone would accept their invitations. Some students might refuse to join certain groups. But even so, the system seemed designed to favor the young masters of the 6 great sects. Yeowun thought deeply as the pieces began to align in his mind. The 3rd examination, as Yonpa described it, was more than just another test. It was an extension of the ongoing struggle for the minor priesthood. The students who failed to assemble a competent group and master the 7 demon sword technique within the given time would be eliminated automatically. Power, leadership, and unity would determine who advanced. He then questioned Yonpa directly. If students could refuse to join certain groups, what chance did ordinary ones have? They lacked resources, influence, and reputation. Without joining a capable leaders team, they would likely fail before even beginning. He understood now why Yonpa had approached him, not for rivalry, but for survival. Yonpa nodded without hesitation. Forming a strong group and learning the sword formation was only the first step. The real challenge lay beyond that, facing whatever trial awaited them. Every group would need a leader who could not only fight, but command, someone capable of leading others to victory. Smiling faintly, Yonpa reminded him of the gift he had promised earlier. That gift, he declared, was himself. Yeowun regarded him quietly and asked what would happen if he wasn't selected as a leader. Yonpa immediately dismissed the thought. He was certain Yeowun would be chosen. His performance and reputation left little doubt. Having a stable, skilled fighter like Yonpa on his team would only strengthen his chances. Yeowun considered his words carefully. He couldn't deny the logic. The likelihood of being selected as a leader was high, and Yompa's skill was evident. Still, something about the offer felt off. His instincts stirred with quiet suspicion. He decided he would confirm the truth his own way, using his method. Keeping his tone even, he asked why Yonpa had chosen him specifically. If what he said was true, then there were stronger candidates. Young masters from the 6 great sects or other proven group leaders from the 2nd examination. Yompa's expression turned slightly awkward. He scratched his head, hesitant to respond. After a moment, he admitted that he had already approached the young masters of both the Shadow Sect and the Sword Sect with the same proposal. Cheon Yeowun's eyes narrowed as he pieced together Yompa's word. He asked if Yonpa had been rejected by the others. Yonpa admitted it without hesitation. Both the Shadow Sect and the Sword Sect had already secured their members. Yeowun's voice hardened slightly as he asked if that meant he had simply been chosen as a backup plan. Yonpa nodded again, but added that there was more to it. He had chosen Yeowun because they both followed the path of the saber. Yeowun's gaze sharpened, silent and unreadable. The look alone made Yonpa falter. Flustered, he quickly clarified his intent. He wasn't asking to become a subordinate, merely to join forces for the 3rd examination. He swore full cooperation and asked almost pleadingly if Yeowun would accept him. For a moment, Yeowun's lips curved faintly into a soft smile. Thinking his request had been accepted, Yonpa dropped to his knees in gratitude, ready to express his thanks. But the response he received froze him in place. Yeowun's voice was steady. He refused. Confused, Yonpa stammered, asking why. Yeowun gave no direct answer, only that it was something Yonpa should think about himself. He turned away, his expression firm and detached. As he walked off, Yeowun silently commanded Nano to deactivate facial expression analysis. Nano complied applied, loading the most recent results. Yeowun's thoughts sharpened. The function might not be flawless, but it was precise enough to confirm a feeling. When Yonpa had claimed both sects had already chosen their members, there had been a subtle twitch, a shift in his facial muscles. Nano's report confirmed it. There had been a 45% likelihood that Yonpa was lying. Yeowun's expression remained calm, but his conclusion was clear. Yonpa's final plea, his supposed loyalty, none of it rang true. Nano's report came through without delay. The subject's facial muscles had continued to twitch throughout the exchange, raising the probability of deceit to 62%. Yeowun's gaze stayed fixed ahead, his mind sharp with realization. He was working off probability, but the pattern was clear. Yonpa's mannerisms, his hesitation, even his carefully chosen words, all too familiar. It mirrored the same deceptive tone Yuchun had used before. It didn't add up. For someone who claimed to walk the path of the saber, Yonpa had conveniently mentioned approaching only the young masters of the Shadow and Sword sects. The omission of the Saber sect was deliberate, and Yeowun could see it for what it was. The man was hiding his true allegiance. He almost smirked. Yonpa thought himself clever, but he wasn't clever enough. Later that evening, in the quiet shadow of the Academy's forest, Yonpa slipped away and met a figure waiting in the narrow alleyway between buildings. Standing before him, with a casual air that belied his sharp eyes, was Cheon Yeowun. Yuchun's tone was light, mocking when Yonpa gave his report. Yeowun had refused. Yuchun laughed, a low, amused sound echoing through the alley. He found Yeowun's reaction entertaining, predictable, even. That kind of confidence was rare among the Academy's students. He mused that he should have expected as much. A cheap ploy like Yonpa's wouldn't work on someone like Yeowun. Yonpa, shaken, tried to speak, explaining that the plan had failed. Yuchun cut him off with a smirk. What could Yonpa possibly do now? Go back and beg Yeowun to accept him? It was pointless. He revealed the plan without hesitation. Yonpa was meant to infiltrate Yeowun's group, only to abandon him on the day of the examination, ensuring his failure for lack of members. It would have been a small, cruel amusement. Though he had planned to sabotage Yeowun, part of him found it wasteful to see such potential go to waste over a trivial scheme. If not for the rivalry for the minor priesthood, he might have even tried to recruit Yeowun himself. Desperate, Yonpa dropped to his knees, pleading for another chance. Yuchun dismissed him with a cold laugh. There was no need for further schemes. He told him instead to find another group to join, or better yet, try becoming a leader himself. Yonpa's voice trembled as he tried to ask if Yuchun would still take him in, but Yuchun's laughter cut him down completely. His tone turned icy. He didn't need any more trash to sort through. The words struck harder than any blade. When Yonpa reached out, clutching for Yuchun's leg, Yuchun moved aside effortlessly, looking down on him with disdain. His voice, now stripped of amusement, was colder than before. He called him a useless fool and ordered him to disappear. Yonpa's pleas echoed faintly as he staggered away, tears burning behind his eyes. Left alone in the silence, Yuchun's expression darkened. Amid his arrogance, one thought refused to fade. Yeowun had defeated Yonpa in a single strike. His brows furrowed. He had witnessed Yeowun's skill just 2 days ago. It wasn't supposed to be that strong. Something about it didn't make sense. He resolved quietly to confirm it himself soon enough, whether Cheon Yeowun's strength came from true mastery or sheer luck. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the underground training room, Yeowun stood alone, his thoughts steady and focused. The words of Yonpa and the implications of the next examination lingered in his mind. If the rumors were true, each group would need 12 members, including a leader, 11 capable fighters. The thought carried weight. He had a few people in mind from Group 8, but even that wouldn't be enough. There was no guarantee they would join him when the time came. He decided to put the thought aside for now. There would be time later to plan. For the moment, training came first. He called to Nano, asking if the analysis of the martial arts manuals he had scanned from the first and second floors was complete. Nano responded immediately. The analysis of 55 third-rate martial arts manuals from the first floor and 56 second-rate manuals from the second floor had been successfully completed. Yeowun's next question was measured but purposeful. Could Nano recreate a full simulation of a specific person, their movements, energy, and combat style, and have them perform a chosen martial arts technique? Nano confirmed it could. All Yeowun needed to do was select the subject and the technique to be reenacted. Without hesitation, Yeowun chose the 5-sword ritual technique, one of the martial arts he had scanned from the library. As for the avatar, he selected Mukum, his former rival whose every movement was still imprinted in memory. Nano began constructing the simulation, embedding the martial arts data into the chosen model. Within seconds, the augmented projection came to life before Yeowun's eyes, perfectly replicating Mukum's stance, expression, and presence. The simulated Mukum moved first, lunging forward with the same arrogance that had once defined him. His strike, though based on a low-ranked martial art, carried practiced precision and lethal intent. Yeowun evaded smoothly, his body instinctively shifting into the butterfly blade dance. With a single motion, his hand swept across the avatar's neck. The strike was clean, sharp, and absolute. Nano's monotone voice followed almost instantly. The avatar's neck had been broken. The simulation had ended. Yeowun blinked, startled. Just 3 days ago, the same movement would would have only knocked an opponent unconscious. Now it killed instantly. He clenched his hand, feeling the faint pulse of strength ripple beneath his skin. Nano's voice confirmed what he already sensed. The simulated opponent had been unable to withstand the sheer power of his attack. His altered body and newfound awakening had elevated his power to a level that made the difference almost laughable. He sighed inwardly. This wasn't what he intended. Even setting the simulation to second-rate martial arts wouldn't change much. Seeking greater pressure, he gave a new order to Nano to create 10 avatars of Mukum, each wielding a different second-rate martial arts technique. Nano responded immediately, initiating the command and populating the augmented space with 10 versions of Mukum, each armed and poised for attack. Yeowun hesitated briefly, wondering if he had overestimated himself, but it was too late. The simulation had already begun. All 10 avatars surged toward him in perfect coordination. He reacted instantly. There was only one move that could counter this formation, the second movement of the butterfly blade dance. His body spun in a controlled arc, hand cutting through the air in fluid succession. 4 avatars were met by the force of his strike, 2 collapsing as their blood points were severed before dissolving into light. There was no time to recover. The others closed in from every direction. Yeowun leapt upward to avoid the barrage, but the ceiling met him before the escape was complete. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber as his head collided with the stone ceiling. He landed hard, the impact leaving a dull ache in his shoulder and the faint vibration of fractured stone above him. Nano's calm tone broke through the silence, announcing that augmented reality had been paused. Yeowun groaned softly, rubbing his head. He had forgotten how confined the underground room was. The illusion of open space had tricked him again. Looking up, he noticed a dent and a web of cracks spreading across the ceiling where he had struck it. Thankfully, it hadn't collapsed, but it was damaged enough to draw attention. With a resigned breath, he left the chamber and reported the incident to the first floor instructor. The instructor followed him down, lighting a candle as they entered the room. His reaction was immediate. Shock gave way to exasperation. The cracked ceiling was impossible to miss. He turned sharply toward Yeowun, voice rising in disbelief. This was the second time in days. His tone carried the finality of a verdict. Yeowun was officially banned from using the personal training rooms. Yeowun bowed slightly, his voice quiet but sincere. He apologized, though he knew it wouldn't change the decision. Without another word, the instructor told him to follow. They left the damaged room behind, stepping into the cool night air. Across from the main training building stood another structure. The instructor lit the candles inside, revealing rows of sealed doors and dust-covered floors. The instructor told him that from now on, this was where he would practice. Yeowun blinked in mild surprise, asking for clarification. The instructor's reply was resolute. Allowing him back into the personal training rooms would only lead to another collapsed wall. Yeowun's gaze swept across the new space. It was far wider, the air cleaner, and the floor smooth beneath his feet. The difference from the confined underground chambers was striking. He asked what this place was, his curiosity evident. The instructor explained that these were advanced training rooms, normally reserved for students who had passed the 4th examination and achieved the level of Ascendant Master. Yeowun was caught off guard. That level was far beyond his current stage of testing. Yet, as the instructor went on, it became clear that this was an exception. Because of the damage he had caused in the other rooms, the Academy deputy had granted him early permission to use this facility instead. Still puzzled, Yeowun asked how the instructor had known his abilities were already nearing that level. The man smiled faintly. Breaking the sentry stone of the personal training room wasn't something that could be done without reaching the power of an Ascendant Master. He added that these rooms were built differently, crafted from adamantine stone, far stronger than anything in the previous chambers. The instructor urged him to train without restraint and left soon after. Yeowun bowed respectfully as he departed. He called to Nano, asking for the time. Nano's voice responded evenly. It was a little after 9 in the evening. Yeowun exhaled softly. There was still time left to train. He considered continuing his fight against the 10 avatars of Mukum, but he knew that wouldn't challenge him enough. He needed a more formidable opponent, one that could push him to refine his precision and control. His mind settled on a familiar figure. He instructed Nano to recreate an avatar of Sir Submeng, based on the demonstration of the dancing butterfly technique he had received while recovering in the infirmary. The air shimmered faintly, and the simulation began to form. Soon, the poised figure of Submeng stood before him. Yeowun's lips curved into a faint grin. Facing this image carried an intensity that no copy of Mukum ever could. The avatar's expression carried Submeng's familiar confidence, as if taunting him. Yeowun exhaled, steadying his stance, and quietly instructed Nano to disable the avatar's voice for future sessions. He reminded himself of what he already knew. Sir Submeng was among the top 10 martial artists within the entire demonic cult. Overpowering him was impossible at Yeowun's current stage. If he wanted even a chance, he would need to strike first. With that resolve, he launched forward. His movements were sharp, driven by focus rather than hesitation. Yet the avatar met his attack with seamless precision, deflecting each motion with effortless grace. A counter followed instantly. Submeng's fist drove into Yeowun's midsection, sending him backward through the simulation space. Before he could recover, the avatar flowed into the third formation of the dancing butterfly butterfly technique. 7 strikes unfolded in perfect succession, cutting through the air and striking Yeowun from every direction. His body hit the ground, pain radiating through him as nanosystems immediately began repairing the simulated damage. He exhaled sharply, sweat trickling down his temple. The difference in skill was overwhelming. He had known it was impossible to win, but being defeated so completely in a single formation was sobering. As the pain faded and the wound sealed, he rose slowly, breathing hard. His voice was low, almost in awe. He had wanted to test himself, and now he understood. This was the true power of one of the top 10 martial artists of the demonic cult. Nano asked if Yeowun wanted to change the avatar or technique. Yeowun declined. The simulation resumed. Yeowun launched himself at the Submeng avatar and opened with the ultimate formation learned from the Blue Pearl Stone. For a moment, the strike landed. The avatar reeled from hits to its blood points, and Yeowun sensed victory. The avatar recovered, however, spinning into a counterblade skill that struck Yeowun off balance. His finger brushed the avatar's forehead, but the returning force slammed him hard against the wall. Groggy, he pushed his head up and noticed shallow wounds on Submeng's avatar where his last form had connected. He had managed to land blows, but the damage was minor. The gap in martial ability remained overwhelming. Merely learning the ultimate technique had not bridged it. Yeowun allowed himself a quiet, resolute thought. He had 4 years to finish the 6 examinations, and in that time, he would surpass Sir Submeng. For now, he would keep training against the avatar. 3 days later, the vast great drill hall was filled with the gathered cadets. The atmosphere buzzed with energy and anticipation, though the expressions of those from high-ranked clans showed quiet confidence. Their families had already hinted at what the third test would entail, and their assured smiles reflected it. At the front stood Left Guardian Lee Ha-meng, his gaze sweeping across the rows of students as his voice carried through the hall. He began by asking if they had enjoyed their 3 days of rest, to which the cadets answered in unison. Then, with deliberate calm, he announced that it was time to explain the rules for the third examination and distribute the demonic dragon marbles. The moment he revealed the structure of the test, murmurs rippled through the hall. The examination would require each student to perform a sword formation in groups of 12. From his place among the cadets, Cheon Yeowun remained composed. The information aligned exactly with what Yompa had told him days earlier. Ha-meng continued, his tone steady but commanding. To perform the 12-person sword formation, every participant would need the strength of a first-rate master. The technique they would learn, the 7-demon sword technique, was a foundational art of the demonic cult's sword formations. He assured them that consuming the demonic dragon marble, paired with proper study and practice, would enable them to reach that level. The room stirred with a mixture of relief and tension. The instructions seemed simple enough, but everyone knew that true mastery was far from easy. Yeowun's thoughts sharpened. The test seemed straightforward, yet there had to be more beneath the surface. A faint grin crossed Ha-meng's face as if reading the collective unease. He revealed the final condition. The examination would take place exactly 4 weeks from that day. Each group's task was to use the sword formation they had learned to defeat the martial arts professors standing before them. The hall fell silent for a moment before gasps and whispers broke out again. Even the most confident cadets paled. Facing professors in open combat was no trivial matter. Ha-meng raised his voice, cutting through the noise. This test, he explained, would differ completely from the previous one. The academy would no longer intervene or organize them. Everything, from forming teams to mastering the formation, would depend entirely on the students themselves. When he finished outlining the process for selecting group leaders, he concluded the session. The manuals and demonic dragon marbles were then distributed, marking the official beginning of the third examination. Yeowun listened as the announcement settled over the hall and felt confusion tighten inside him. He had assumed leaders would be chosen by prior evaluations. Ha-meng gestured toward the professors and revealed that 17 instructors stood before them, each wearing a badge, insisting the professors would use only the 7-demon sword technique. But the reassurance did little to ease the growing panic. The professors were ascendant masters, and the constraint of 7 days made mastery and countering the formation nearly unthinkable. Yeowun understood the intent behind the test, forcing students into haste, revealing who truly grasped the technique and who panicked. Ha-meng watched the crowd's confusion with a small, knowing satisfaction, and then invited volunteers to try stealing badges immediately, hoping someone would step forward to prove courage and skill, a spectacle that could raise a student's standing or expose them completely. His voice echoed again, laced with mockery as he surveyed the silent crowd. Not a single hand had been raised. With a faint smirk, he turned to leave, only to pause mid-step when movement caught his eye. 3 cadets had stepped forward, Myeon of the Wise clan, Cheon Yeowun, and the 18th cadet, the one who had defeated Jongsum of the Poison clan to become leader of the 12th group. A spark of intrigue lit in Ha-meng's eyes. What began as a routine provocation had suddenly become something far more interesting. 2 of these challengers were entirely unexpected, and that alone was enough to stir his excitement. He broke into laughter, the sound sharp and delighted as he praised their boldness. Then, turning to the line of professors, he called called for volunteers to face the 3 cadets. 7 instructors stepped forward, their yellow tags gleaming under the torchlight. By coincidence, or perhaps instinct, among them were the instructors who had overseen the 1st, 8th, and 12th groups. Hameng's smile faltered slightly. He had explicitly instructed his staff to remain impartial, yet it seemed they had already grown attached to their students. The instructors themselves hesitated as they realized who stood before them. 3 quietly retreated, unwilling to volunteer further. That left one man stepping confidently to the front, Ho Jin-chang, the academy's most seasoned instructor. In-pyeong, standing nearby, watched him move and silently exhaled. His gaze briefly met Yeowun's from across the hall, and though he said nothing, his thoughts were firm. From here on, Yeowun would have to rely solely on his own strength. No one among the professors would hold back against him now. Hameng observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. The matchups were forming in a way that ensured fairness and danger. Each professor now stood opposite a student they hadn't personally trained. At least with Jin-chang stepping forward, this test was about to become truly interesting. His tone turned brisk as he called for the first challenger. Before Jin-chang could step forward, Instructor Yushin from the 12th group raised his hand, his voice firm and eager as he volunteered. The interruption drew an immediate frown from Jin-chang. The veteran had intended to face Moyon himself, intrigued by the young warrior's potential, yet Yushan's interference shifted the dynamics entirely. Quietly, he turned to another target and raised his hand instead, declaring his intent to face the 18th student. Hameng's eyes gleamed at the developing situation. Jin-chang's subtle retaliation hadn't gone unnoticed. Yushan had taken the opponent Jin-chang wanted, and now Jin-chang would take Yushan's own pupil in return. The arrangement, Hameng thought, couldn't have been more entertaining. When all matchups were confirmed, Yeowun found himself paired against Sung Munyo, the instructor of the first group. The pairing suited both. Munyo had wanted to test Yeowun from the very beginning. Across the hall, Chun Muyon and Yushan faced each other with mutual acknowledgement. They exchanged brief bows before taking their stances. Yeowun stood still, his eyes fixed sharply on their movements. He gave a single command under his breath, for Nano was to record everything. Hameng's commanding voice echoed through the great hall, his roar cutting through the tense air as he signaled for the duel to begin. At once, Chun Muyon surged forward. His movements were fluid and forceful, carrying the signature elegance of the Wise clan's martial lineage. The flowing cloud palm swept outward with seamless grace, its shifting rhythm like rolling mist and crashing waves. Yushin, standing firm, met the attack head on. He recognized the technique instantly, the famed flowing dark cloud palm, one of the 3 most revered palm arts within the entire demonic cult. A brief thrill passed through him, though his expression remained steady. He raised his hand and executed the defensive pattern of the 5th form of the 7-demon sword, his strikes tracing deliberate arcs through the air to counter the incoming wave of energy. The battle intensified. Moyon transitioned swiftly into another formation, his palms twisting with controlled ferocity, each strike carrying condensed internal power. Yushin grinned in delight, noticing the prowess of his young cadet as an ascendant master. He abandoned restraint and released twin sword strikes, each layered with sharp precision. Sparks of energy burst outward as sword and ki collided. Muyon staggered slightly, his expression tightening. His attack had been blocked completely, something he hadn't expected. The fight dragged on for 10 exchanges, and within that time, Yushin had displayed the full breadth of the 7-demon sword's 7 known formations. Muyon's gaze sharpened. Both were evenly matched in technique, but Yushan's superior experience and reservoir of internal energy tilted the battle in his favor. Acknowledging that prolonging the fight would only widen the gap, Muyon drew in a deep breath, shifting smoothly into a new stance. Yushin steadied his breath as his eyes followed Muyon's movements closely. A quiet realization struck him. Muyon was about to unleash his finishing move. If the cadet was intent on ending it in one strike, then Yushin would need to meet that power head on. He focused his energy, ki surging through his veins as he prepared to counter with full strength. In an instant, Muyon burst forward. His right arm drew back, while his left palm thrust outward in a spiraling strike. The motion seemed straightforward, until it wasn't. The flow of ki shifted mid-movement. The palm strike twisted sharply, redirecting its force in the opposite direction. Yushan's eyes widened as the attack changed its trajectory entirely, appearing from an unexpected angle. He moved instinctively to block, but before he could adjust, Muyon's right hand snapped forward. A surge of sword ki erupted from his fingertips, sharp and concentrated like a blade. The strike pierced Yushan's shoulder cleanly. Blood splattered across the floor as the instructor staggered backward, his face twisting in pain before his body collapsed heavily onto the ground. The hall erupted in shouts. Cadets gasped, some cheering, others staring in awe. The first group leader had defeated an instructor, and done so using sword ki, a mark of mastery that only high-level martial artists could achieve. Hameng's eyes gleamed with approval. He recognized the technique instantly. It was a rare and complex art, one that merged dual techniques, alternating between left and right hands to deceive the opponent. That technique had once belonged solely to Jinwon Mu, the formidable head of the Shadow Sect. For decades, no one had been able to replicate it, yet before him stood a cadet who had not only inherited the technique but mastered it, a prodigy energy in every sense. As the murmurs filled the hall, Yushin, still clutching his bleeding shoulder, forced a strained smile. His pride as an instructor outweighed the pain. He muttered, acknowledging the young warrior's brilliance. Muyan bowed respectfully as Yushan removed his yellow badge and extended it toward him. Amid the uproar, Yeowun's eyes lingered on the yellow tag now in Muyan's hand. The rules of the test echoed in his mind. Take the tag and become a leader, but something about it unsettled him. Was there a hidden condition? Was each student limited to only one? While Yeowun was being curious, Lee Ha-meng called for the next fight. Yeowun walked toward the center of the arena. Across from him stood Sung Munyo, his opponent, his test, and his next obstacle. The question about the yellow tag could wait. What mattered now was this moment. He stopped a few steps away and met Munyo's gaze. A quiet determination settled in his eyes. This fight would decide how the academy viewed him, and perhaps how far he would climb from here. Sung Munyo observed him closely. There was something different about the young cadet, an unsettling composure that shouldn't belong to someone his age. Munyo had expected nervousness, maybe even fear. Instead, Yeowun stood still, calm and unreadable. For a brief moment, Munyo's thoughts drifted. Yeowun's progress had already exceeded every expectation the instructors had held for him. It was impressive, but Munyo refused to acknowledge him as a true candidate. In his mind, only Muyan and Yuchen were worthy of that title. The rest were just hopeful, destined to fall short. He had made up his mind. Yeowun's rise would end here. Across from him, Yeowun lowered his stance and drew a steady breath. Sung Munyo's eyes narrowed as he recognized the stance. The butterfly blade dance. He gave a faint flick of his hand, one that dared Yeowun to strike first. Yeowun steadied his breath, his gaze locked on Sung Munyo. He had stepped into the beginning stages of the Ascendant Master level, yet his internal energy was still far from refined. To Munyo, that difference meant nothing more than superiority, and the instructor's calm expression made it clear he didn't see Yeowun as a threat. That arrogance would be his mistake. Yeowun's foot slid across the ground, and in the next instant, his body shot forward like a spear. The 10-star attack burst forth with overwhelming speed. Munyo's eyes widened. The movement was far sharper than what Yeowun had shown days before. Instinctively, he raised his energy, pushing his internal defense to 70% just in time to meet the impact. The collision rang through the hall. Munyo staggered back, his boots scraping against the floor as he stumbled 5 heavy steps before managing to steady himself. Shock spread across his face. Yeowun's strength was far beyond his expectation. A rush of frustration surged through him. He could not accept being pushed back, especially not in front of an audience of cadets. His jaw clenched as fury took hold. Yeowun didn't give him a moment to recover. He leapt forward, his elbow crashing down with explosive force. Munyo groaned as he slid backward again, dust scattering under his heels. Munyo steadied himself, his breath quick and sharp. He could feel the weight of Yeowun's attack, yet he could also tell his opponent's energy flow was still unstable, unrefined. That gave him an opening. With a swift motion, Munyo unleashed the 4th and 6th movements of the 7-demon sword. Blades of energy flashed through the air, aimed to end the match decisively, but Yeowun's expression didn't waver. He could see it, the flaw in the formation, the tiny fracture in the flow of ki. The sword movement wasn't perfect. Compared to the counter sword technique engraved in the sapphire stone, it was incomplete. He stepped aside, sliding smoothly out of range. Munyo's grin widened, mistaking the movement for recklessness, until realization struck. Yeowun's blade arm flicked upward, tracing a simple, efficient arc. Each of Munyo's attacks was intercepted with flawless precision, one after another, until the flurry of sword strikes dissolved into nothing. The hall fell silent. The watching cadets stared, stunned. None of them had expected Yeowun to stand against an instructor. Even Lee Ha-meng, known for his unshakable composure, felt disbelief wash over him. Cheon Yeowun had neutralized the 7-demon sword technique with nothing more than the foundational movements of the dancing butterfly, an impossible feat by any standard of martial arts. Across the hall, Sung Munyo's expression twisted into rage. The humiliation of being countered by a mere cadet burned through his pride. His fury clouded his judgment, and his energy flared violently as he prepared to end the duel through sheer destruction. A dense wave of power erupted from his body, signaling the release of a lethal strike meant to crush Yeowun from within. The blow landed with devastating force. The impact tore through the air as Yeowun's body lurched under the pressure, blood bursting from his mouth as his organs trembled under the assault. The energy tore through his meridians like wildfire, leaving trails of pain searing deep into his core. But within the chaos, his body began to stabilize. The internal system that flowed through his veins repaired the damage in silence. Torn tissues sealed, ruptured energy channels realigned, and the bleeding ceased as swiftly as it began. The lingering pain remained, but Yeowun's posture never faltered. His blurred vision steadied, and his focus locked once more onto his opponent. Sung Munyo's confidence began to unravel. His breathing quickened, disbelief creeping across his features as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. Despite the strike that should have shattered his insides, Yeowun stood firm, his gaze cold and resolute. That fleeting moment of hesitation from Munyo marked his downfall. Yeowun's stance shifted in an instant, and the air cracked from the force of his movement. His blade hand shot forward like a flash of lightning, driving straight into Munyo's right side. The sound of bone giving way echoed through the hall. Munyo's internal barrier broke apart under the sheer physical force. His ribs collapsed inward, and the strength that had filled his body vanished as agony overwhelmed him. Blood erupted from Munyo's mouth as raw pain carved across his face. The cadets gaped in horror, jaws slack with disbelief. Clutching Yeowun's shoulder as his legs gave out, Munyo slumped to the floor. He collapsed with a heavy thud and soon lay unconscious. Yeowun panted, scanning the stunned silence that had swallowed the drill hall. Around him, the atmosphere felt brittle and unreal. From the edge of the crowd, Yuchen noted coldly that Yonpa had not overstated the danger Yeowun represented. Lee Hameng's mind raced. The Seven Demon Sword technique, forged and refined by the Sword Demon, was legendary precisely because it resisted counters, yet Yeowun had neutralized it. Regret flickered through Hameng. He now questioned his decision to let Sumeng handle Yeowun's training. The instructors moved quickly. They reported that Sung Munyo's ribs were shattered, 3 protruding painfully, and ordered him taken at once to the infirmary. Hameng realized with a jolt that he had neglected to inform the other professors about Yeowun's earlier feat of breaking Century Stone. Had they known, Munyo might never have engaged so recklessly. He barked the command to move Munyo immediately. Yeowun picked up the yellow tag, a quiet proof of victory in his hand. Around him, the instructors exchanged grim, bitter remarks. 2 consecutive losses would make them look foolish. The drill hall remained locked in shocked silence as the consequences settled in. Jin Chang observed the instructors in silence, his expression firm, but his thoughts conflicted. It was natural for the gifted to surpass their teachers, a truth that should inspire pride, not resentment. Yet the instructors around him seemed more preoccupied with saving face than celebrating the strength of the next generation. A faint sigh escaped him as regret tightened his chest. He had misjudged Yeowun, dismissing the boy's potential and choosing another instead. The weight of that mistake lingered bitterly. Hameng's commanding voice broke through the murmurs, announcing the day's final match. Jin Chang and Baekji stepped forward onto the platform, their presence drawing the attention of every cadet and instructor. The unspoken sentiment among the staff was clear. They all silently urged Jin Chang to restore their dignity. He was, after all, the most formidable instructor among them. Baekji bowed respectfully, his tone measured and sincere as he greeted his opponent. Jin Chang responded with equal composure, acknowledging the student's humility before readying himself. A deep surge of energy unfurled from the instructor, a presence so vast it seemed to distort the air around him. Baekji steadied himself, eyes sharpening with resolve. His body lowered into stance, tension coiling through his frame. When he finally moved, it was with explosive speed. Yeowun, watching from the crowd, noted the precision behind Baekji's technique. The movement wasn't that of a blade user as he had assumed. It was a refined kick technique. Baekji's movements blurred as he unleashed a flurry of spinning kicks, each strike cutting through the air with sharp precision. Yet Jin Chang evaded them effortlessly, his upper body weaving fluidly, his footing never once faltering. Baekji's strikes found nothing but empty space, each narrowly missing as Jin Chang shifted with quiet control. The instructor's calm voice cut through the rhythm of combat, a measured warning. In the next instant, his finger shot out, pressing firmly into the blood point on Baekji's leg. The impact forced Baekji to twist his waist and spin, retaliating with another kick that carried both desperation and strength. Jin Chang's hand moved again, impossibly fast, meeting the incoming foot with precise accuracy. His fingertip touched the sole like a blade, and blood burst outward. The sudden sting tore through Baekji's leg as pain spread up his body. He was thrown backward, stumbling across the ground as his right foot flushed red and throbbed violently. The realization struck him like a wave. That sharp, refined force wasn't ordinary internal energy. To release sword chi through a single touch spoke of power beyond a mere master. Baekji's expression hardened as the truth settled in. Jin Chang wasn't an instructor of average strength. He had reached the superior master level. Jin Chang's stance never wavered as he observed his struggling opponent. Baekji's injured leg left him vulnerable, and continuing with the same strategy was futile. Still, Baekji straightened, determination flashing across his face. The pain in his foot grounded him rather than held him back. With a single controlled breath, he steadied his balance and leapt forward. His form shifted midair, body lowering suddenly as Jin Chang's palm swept past harmlessly above him. Using that momentum, Baekji propelled himself upward, channeling every ounce of power into his final strike. A surge of light flared from his foot, unmistakable ki, pure and unrestrained. Jin Chang's eyes narrowed slightly and a faint smirk formed at the edge of his lips. The young warrior standing before him had already stepped into the threshold of an ascendant master. Jin Chang shifted seamlessly into a sword formation, his movements sharp and fluid as he built a layered defense around himself. Baekji's incoming strike met the defense with a sharp recoil, forcing him to twist mid-air and land on his hands with one leg raised to recover balance. Then his eyes caught a flicker, an afterimage moving behind him. His breath hitched. Jin Chang had vanished from his line of sight. Panic flashed through him, the realization setting in too late. wait. Jin Chang was already within range, closing the distance in an instant. His tone remained steady, almost regretful as he struck. His hand redirected Baek Ji's kick before pressing directly into the blood point at his chest. There was no need for chi. The sheer control of internal energy was enough to crush the air from Baek Ji's lungs. The young warrior slammed into the ground, coughing violently as blood escaped his lips. Gasps rippled across the hall as the cadets watched in stunned silence. The fight had ended in mere moments. Baek Ji, who had fought bravely, had been effortlessly subdued. Yeowun's eyes narrowed slightly. There was something unnatural about Baek Ji's color. His neck flushed red, his skin losing tone rapidly. Silently, he commanded Nano to scan the student's condition. The confirmation came without delay, stored for review once the announcements concluded. Wooden swords, manuals, and the demonic dragon marbles were handed out one by one, each item representing a critical step toward the upcoming examination. Lee Hameng's voice carried firmly across the hall as he reminded them that each cadet would receive only one sword, and that it was to be treated as if it were their life itself. After his final command of dismissal, the cadets dispersed, murmuring with both excitement and tension. Yeowun studied it for a moment, his mind already set. He would consume the marble first, letting its power merge with his own. Only then would he proceed to the other tasks that awaited him. The night before, inside the quiet quarters of Group 8's dormitory, tension had filled the air. Eungchun's voice broke the silence first, his tone uncertain. He questioned whether placing their faith in Yeowun was reckless, a dangerous wager that could provoke the Sixth Sect's ire. Hobum, however, stood firm. Though he admitted his fear, he refused to spend his life in the shadow of mediocrity. He believed that by following Yeowun, they could rise beyond their low-born origins and carve a new path under his leadership. His conviction was contagious. After a moment of contemplation, Machil, Eungchun, and Dame Young exchanged resolute glances and pledged their loyalty. Together, they vowed to follow Cheon Yeowun, believing in his potential to become a symbol of strength and change within the cult. The following day, as Yeowun walked through the training grounds toward the private room, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. His earlier victory had turned heads across the academy. Groups of cadets approached him, their eyes filled with admiration and calculation alike. Hobum immediately stepped forward with vigilance, flanked by the others. Together, they blocked the approaching students, standing like loyal sentinels. Yeowun almost smiled at the sight. Hobum was playing his role as a devoted subordinate perfectly. When the group parted at Yeowun's signal, a tall, broad-shouldered cadet stepped forward, his expression confident yet respectful. He introduced himself as Wanghul Ko, student number 857, and without hesitation declared his intent to join Yeowun's group. Behind him, the members of Group 8 exchanged excited glances. Recruiting a strong, capable fighter like Wanghul could strengthen their formation tremendously. And with the third examination approaching, every addition mattered. Wanghul declared his origins from the Demon Fist sect, one of the upper branches of the cult. His voice carried weight as he revealed that he had already reached the level of a first-rate master, promising that his strength would be of value to Yeowun's group. One by one, the other cadets followed his lead, announcing their names and sects. Among the 16 who stood before Yeowun, 5 hailed from high-ranked clans, while the remaining 11 belonged to middle or lower sects. The air was filled with anticipation, every cadet eager yet uncertain of the path ahead. When the last voice faded, Yeowun's gaze swept across the group. His words, when he finally spoke, carried a quiet intensity that cut through the murmurs around him. He told them that he was not looking for temporary allies who sought only to pass the third examination. What he sought were comrades, those willing to walk beside him even after they left the academy, through every peril that awaited within the demonic cult. His tone held no pretense. It was a solemn declaration of intent. Realization struck the cadets like a wave. They understood the weight behind his words. Cheon Yeowun wasn't merely gathering a team for the examination. He was laying the foundation for his bid for the throne itself. The room grew still. Fear began to ripple through the group. To align with Yeowun was to stand against the 6 great clans, a path that could mean exile or death. Yeowun noticed the hesitation, yet his expression remained firm. His next words carried quiet conviction, not arrogance, but an unshakable resolve. He told them that the size or prestige of their sects meant nothing to him. Strength of loyalty mattered more than lineage. Titles and ranks would lose their meaning once their ultimate goal was achieved. What he intended was not survival within the old order, but the creation of a new one. His vow to change the 6 foundations of the demonic cult was a declaration few dared even whisper, let alone speak aloud. For a brief moment, silence stretched through the room, heavy and unmoving. Then, one by one, the cadets began to stir. The first spoke timidly, eyes lowered, apologizing that he only wished to pass the upcoming test. Another followed, bowing respectfully before walking away. Soon, voices overlapped as cadets excused themselves, each one cloaked in fear and uncertainty. Behind him, the loyal members of Group 8 exchanged uneasy glances. Hobum clenched his fist in frustration, while Eungchun's face grew pale. They knew Yeowun could have easily accepted the cadets first and revealed his intent later. One after another, the crowd crowd dispersed until only 3 remained. To everyone's surprise, among those who stayed was Ko Wang-hul of the Demon Fist sect. The large-built cadet stepped forward, his voice steady yet sincere. He admitted the danger that came with Yeowun's ambition, that following him could mean certain death. Yet as a true martial artist, he could not ignore the call of such conviction. The dream of domination, of reshaping the future through strength, resonated with something deep within him. With resolute eyes, Wang-hul dropped to one knee and pressed his fist to his chest. His declaration rang with pride and loyalty as he pledged himself to Yeowun, swearing to become his first sword, the blade that would never waver nor bow to another. Inspired by his devotion, the remaining 2 cadets stepped forward as well, Yumin-ja of the Golden Gate sect and Ojong of the Singing Sword sect, each pledging their loyalty in turn. Yeowun bowed slightly to the 3 of them, his tone solemn but warm as he thanked them. Hobum, however, could not resist stepping closer, pointing at Wang-hul with mock indignation. He boldly reminded him that while he might serve as Yeowun's sword or shield, he would always remain the master's first servant. Wang-hul blinked at the remark, then broke into laughter. Later, as dusk settled, Yeowun gathered his small but loyal group outside the personal training rooms. His tone returned to calm command as he addressed them. He ordered them to consume their demonic dragon marbles immediately to build their internal energy. Afterward, they were to review the 7 demons' sword technique, ensuring they understood every detail of its flow and formation. When Hobum asked if they were only to review it, Yeowun nodded. He instructed that starting the next morning, they would train together under his guidance. Yeowun's newly formed group was brimming with quiet admiration. Their thoughts aligned in silent agreement. They had chosen wisely, unlike the other aspiring leaders who viewed their subordinates as tools. Yeowun, however, carried a faint grin beneath his calm expression. His thoughts drifted briefly to his past lessons under Submeng. He had learned firsthand that growth was forged through pressure and pain, not comfort. They'll learn. If they don't, I'll beat it into them, just as Sir Submeng did for me. Turning to his followers, his tone became firm yet composed. He ordered each of them to enter separate training rooms and consume their demonic dragon marbles immediately. They were to reconvene later that night at 10. The group responded in unison before dispersing into the corridors. As they departed, Wang-hul lingered behind. He suggested that Yeowun not remain alone, that either he or one of the others should accompany him at all times. The rules of the examination seemed too conveniently designed, and he sensed danger beneath their surface. Yeowun's eyes narrowed slightly. Wang-hul's intuition echoed his own unspoken suspicion. The rule had stated that anyone who stole a yellow badge within 7 days would become a group leader, but no rule had said the badges must be taken only from instructors. It was entirely possible the academy intended for the students to turn on one another, Wang-hul continued, reasoning that their collective strength was still limited compared to the powerful groups led by high-ranking students, particularly Student 1 of the Shadow Sect. That imbalance made Yeowun a likely target. He ended his words with quiet conviction, insisting that caution would serve them well in times like these. Yeowun regarded him with acknowledgement as he thanked Wang-hul for his foresight. Wang-hul bowed respectfully as he assured Yeowun that it was his duty as a follower to remain close. He declared that he would use the room next to Yeowun's as a precaution. Yeowun, caught slightly off guard, explained that he would not be using the standard personal training rooms. Instead, he had been assigned to train in the restricted chambers, the rooms reserved exclusively for those who had already reached the Ascendant Master level. Wang-hul froze in astonishment, his eyes widening in disbelief. He had heard rumors of such rooms, but never imagined any cadet would gain access so soon. His surprise quickly turned to determination as he vowed to train relentlessly until he too reached that level and could stand alongside his lord. Yeowun gave a faint, awkward nod at the declaration, before excusing himself. Inside the secluded training chamber, the air was still and heavy with energy. His aura was stronger, denser. His body pulsated with refined ki that extended beyond his previous limits. He had now entered the early stage of the Ascendant Master realm. He observed the energy forming around his hand, its flow sharp and vibrant, almost tangible. If he willed it, that force could take the shape of a sword or saber. It was the mark of mastery. He commanded Nano to play back the recorded battle between Baekji and Jin Chang. The augmented reality activated, casting a vivid reconstruction of the fight before him. Yeowun's eyes followed the movements with sharp precision, analyzing every strike, block, and shift of energy. Then, as Baekji was struck down and forced to stand again, Yeowun narrowed his gaze. He ordered Nano to zoom in until the image displayed every pore, every twitch of skin on Baekji's face and neck. Baekji's face was pale, his lips faintly blue, and his eyes bloodshot, signs that his internal flow was being disrupted. A low murmur escaped his lips, quiet yet brimming with fury. It was poison. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.